Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to start working on the key for the lock. It's going to be made out of two pieces. The main body of the key is going to be made out of this 1/2 inch round bar, and then I'm making the actual bit of the key out of this 1/2 inch square bar. I'm going to be using a sculpted key bit, so there aren't going to be any wards in this lock. The security is going to come from the complicated shape that the key has to be able to fit into the lock. The only forging that I need to do for this key is to punch a hole for the ring. So here I'm just flattening out the bar slightly so it doesn't roll around on the anvil, and then I'm going to use the last little bit of the heat to get the punch location marked out. I always prefer to use the last bit of the heat to get the punch registered rather than trying to do the whole process at the beginning of the heat. At the end of the heat, you can take your time. You don't have enough heat to work with anyway, so you can get the location locked in so that at the beginning of the next heat, you can register your punch very quickly and get the maximum amount of work done in that heat. You can see here how I'm having a little bit of trouble getting that line where I want it, but it's not a problem because it's at the end of the heat. I can, just play with it until I get it right and then stick it back in the fire and come back fresh the next time. So here I can get right to work. I don't have to think about anything. I just lock the punch into the groove that I made in the last heat and I can start working. And then it's just a matter of using a series of round punches to get the eye roughed out. I'm leaving the ring really heavy because I'm going to be filing out the final shape, so I want to have lots of material to work with. This lock is going to offer a little bit more resistance than a normal lock, so I want the ring to be very comfortable. I don't want sharp edges or thin edges that are going to cut into your hand. Before I do the final forging, I'm going to use a file to remove any burrs or raised edges. If I leave them and just hammer them down, chances are they're going to create cold shuts. And when I'm filing, I'm going to tear into one of those and I may be left with a hole that I can't remove. So just hammering them out may be fine if you're doing some rough forging, but when you're finishing something, you want to make sure that you have a perfectly clean surface that doesn't have any cold shuts. I'm going to be turning the shaft of the key on a lathe, so I need to get the ring out of the way so I can mount the center of the lathe right on the end of the bar. This punch kind of shows you the arrangement that I'm going to be working with. The center is going to be mounted to the end of the key shaft, and then the ring is going to be allowed to spin around the center. Before I head over to the lathe, I'm going to rough in the shape of the key bit. The first thing that I need to do is scribe a line near one end of the bar, and everything to your left of that line is going to be for the tenon that's going to fit inside the shaft of the key. And on the right side of that line is where I'm going to be cutting out the key bit. I'm going to be using a pretty simple S shape, and it's going to cover the whole width of this bar. So I'm going to be cutting the same shape keyhole, so any key that doesn't have this specific shape isn't going to be able to fit into the lock. To rough out the shape of the bit, I'm going to be able to drill out a couple of holes to define the inside radiuses of the S shape, and then I'm going to use a hacksaw to cut down into these drill holes. That's going to create the release cut that I need to be able to chisel out the rest of the shape. And here once again I'm just using cold chisels to carve out the shape. I know it sounds like I'm using an air hammer, but I'm just fast forwarding through this clip because you've seen this many times before. And here's the key bit with the basic shape roughed out. I'll be refining the shape later on with some files, but this is all the chisel work that I need to get done in the vise. Here I'm getting ready to do the final turning on the shaft of the key, and you can see how the lathe center is locked into the end of the actual shaft. I wound up having to bend the ring a little bit further than I had originally bent it so that the lathe center could reach the end of the shaft. The cutting tool on the lathe is just going to be used to block in the major dimensions of the shaft, and I'm going to be finishing the whole thing with files. So here's where I'm going to be leaving the turning for now. The dimensions of the shaft have been roughed out, and the detail in the center of the shaft is far enough along that I'm going to be able to use files later on to clean up that profile. This key blank still needs to go back in the fire, so I don't want any fine details that might get lost while I'm brazing the key bit. Now that I'm done with the lathe, I need to straighten out the ring so that I can do the final shaping on it. I have to make sure that I clamp the ring above the turn section so I don't distort that thin shaft. Once I get it straightened out enough, I can go back to the anvil to do the final shaping. The next thing that I need to do is saw out the tenon that I'm going to be inserting into the mortise that's going to be on the key shaft. I'm going to be sawing out the tenon on the key bit first, and then I'm going to use it to size the mortise that I need to cut into the key shaft. It's important to take your time with this operation because you'll save yourself a lot of grief in the fire if you can get a tight fit to a point where you need to hammer the two pieces together. I've roughed in the location of the tenon by drilling out most of the material, and now I'm just using a narrow chisel to remove the material in between the two drill holes. Once again, this is just standard chisel work that you've seen me do several times in this project. Here I'm a little bit further along. I have the mortise all cleaned out and the tenon has been filed smooth into the right shape. And I have a good snug fit between the mortise and the tenon, so it's just a matter of driving the two pieces together. I'm not going to cut the bit from the bar until I'm totally done the brazing process, because if something works loose and it falls in the fire, I'm going to lose all that work that I've done. So I'm going to braze the piece. Once it's solid and I know that it's secure, I'm going to cut the bit from the bar that I use to shape it. And the process for brazing this bit to the shaft is the same that I used for all the other parts of this lock. You just take your time, heat up the bar very, very slowly. You want the internal temperature of the bar to be very hot so the brazed material will flow into the mortise pocket and completely fill every part of that joint. Once again, I'm using actual brazing rod here, and I'm putting an extra coat of borax on the key just to make sure that there's enough flux to flow through the entire joint. But if you wanted to, you could do this with copper wire the same way I've done in other videos. From a practical point of view, the only advantage really in using brazing rod is that it melts at a slightly lower temperature, so your parts aren't going to scale up as much as they do when you use copper. But I think the tensile strengths of both materials are fairly similar. So you're going to wind up with a very strong joint either way. The only downside with brazing is that you have all the crap from the flux to clean up afterwards. But it sure is a nice easy alternative to forge welding if you don't need the strength. So here's the key all finished. It's assembled and I've wire brushed it a little bit. Now I can cut the key bit from the bar and I'm ready to do a lot of filing. Hi, I'm Dennis and thanks for watching. If you have questions and you want to contact me directly, you can do so by emailing me at either one of the addresses that I have listed here. It may take me a couple of days, but I will get back to you. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.